Well, I'm gonna do the always foolish thing and make a plea for nuance in fandom conversations. Oh dear. Hey there, folks. It has been a while since I have dedicated a video to an aspect of toxic fandom. Toxic fandom as a general topic comes up intermittently, usually as a side note in something else that I'm talking about, or sometimes as the reason I'm deciding to talk about something, but I haven't talked about the various aspects of toxic fandom in specific for quite a while. And I think it's time for me to kind of circle back around onto something that I have avoided in the past, because this is not only going to address a certain aspect of toxic fandom, but it's also going to deal with an aspect of problematic creators. And when I did my video talking about problematic creators, I made a very deliberate choice in that video to focus on novelists. Specifically, I cited Orson Scott Card, H.P. Lovecraft, and of course, J.K. Rowling. And in all three cases, the reason I picked them was partly because they fell along a spectrum of how much their problematic ideas and notions had seeped into their actual work, and dealing with that as an aspect. And at the time, Rowling wasn't what she currently is. But the reason I picked novelists in that was because I really wanted something for that conversation to be clear cut. This is the person who originates this entire thing. Like, if it wasn't for this person, this thing wouldn't exist. I deliberately avoided talking about collaborative mediums like film, television, video games, because in instances like those, while you might be able to point to somebody as the primary creative force behind something, especially if in a film, if you've got someone being both writer and director, especially if they're a writer, director, and producer, yeah, that's pretty much their stuff. But it's a very collaborative medium, and especially just the sheer number of people who work on some of these things, somebody in there is going to be a problem. They just are. And it is one of the things that people will bring up in bad faith in an attempt to be like, oh, well, what do you mean I can't enjoy Harry Potter stuff just because J.K. Rowling is against trans people? Of course, they don't even claim that anymore. They still try and claim that that's not the case. We're not going down that rabbit hole today. But it's like, well, I'm sure there's bad people who work on everything. Well, yes, but you wouldn't know their names. The person whose name is immediately associated with the thing and is going to benefit from any continued success of that thing, yeah, you can make an argument that supporting work benefits that kind of person tied to it. But there is some truth in the fact that, especially in large collaborative mediums, there's gonna be somebody who's a jackass involved. Like, I will acknowledge that as fact. But the thing is, what I've been seeing lately, and yes, this is again a notion largely spurred on by what I was seeing around conversations regarding a storyboard artist and Has Been Hotel. If you don't know what went on there, I did an entire video actually interviewing said person, a storyboard artist who goes by Raphael 2. I'm actually very proud of that video. There's a good chance that'll be the video I'm most proud of this year. But if you want to know more about that in particular, you can check that out. I'm not going to reiterate it here. But I would see, because I didn't dig too deep, but I did dig a little bit into the kind of ways that R2, which is sort of the shortening that he goes by, would get brought up in conversations around it. And a very common thing would be fans kind of jumping down people's throats like, oh, how can you support something when there's a person on staff who's like this? And even setting aside all the specifics of R2 himself, it just struck me as a very aggressive way to go about things. And when I started thinking about it, it's hardly specific to that. The number of times I get random comments on videos bringing up what a writer, producer, actor, director said, not even necessarily in direct relation to a piece of media I'm talking about, but people bring it up and demand that I somehow respond to that. Like, well, what about this? What about, with this expectation that presented as if there's an expectation that I would know and have an opinion, quite possibly in reality, just stirring the pot. But I do think there are some people who get very genuinely angry when they see people supporting a piece of work that they think is benefiting and or made by people who are, to be real reductive about it, bad. And I am not going to say that you have no business judging anybody for their enjoyment of certain kinds of media. I don't think that's true. I would be lying if I said I don't have some degree of judgment towards people who continue to positively speak of and promote anything Harry Potter related, to be honest, even if they are otherwise allies or contributing to transpositivity in other ways. I still think that's harmful. I'm not necessarily going to launch at and attack those people. That's a issue of how you conduct yourself. But for me to say that I don't judge people, no, I do. Because at this point, it's been going on long enough that if you claim to not know what J.K. Rowling has been saying, that at this point has to be a fairly willful ignorance, unless you are legitimately somebody who is just very offline. And if you are, you won't hear me talking about this anyway. So, yeah. But I'm not going to say there's no room for judgment to be had, but I think there's a lot of things that people can and probably should take into account before jumping down other people's throats. And honestly, you shouldn't be jumping down somebody's throat anyway. Again, that's a conduct issue. But before you feel the need to actually bring it up to somebody, there's a few things to take into account. The first is something that needs to be understood and acknowledged. Everybody has for themselves what I tend to refer to as the ugh factor, which is that there are some things that just about a person, maybe it's something they did, they said, they've supported, they believed, whatever it is, there are some things that for you will just make you go, ugh, in regards to people who have said or done or thought those things. And we all have those. And while I'm not going to say there's no such thing as some universal ughs, I'd say there's a couple that are pretty universal. But by and large, you do need to understand that your own personal list of ugh items is not going to be the same as everybody else's. An example that I've pulled before is I have a friend who has never seen and will never see the Disney Pixar movie Up. The reason being, Ed Asner set off his ugh factor. Because if you weren't aware, Ed Asner was a 9/11 truther. He was a 9/11 was an inside job guy. And for their own reasons, this friend of mine has that as like an ugh factor. It just puts them off being able to enjoy the works with somebody like that. Now, is that personally an ugh factor for me? No. I don't really respect that opinion. I don't think it was a good thing for him to believe it or say out loud. But does that personally hit my ugh factor? No. But it hits that friend of mine. And I'm not going to judge them for that. Because there will just be those things. And oftentimes that is one of the things that becomes an issue. You need to understand not everybody has the same moral compass you do. Not everyone will be outraged or draw hard lines in the same places that you do. Again, there are a handful of things that universally or pretty close to it cross the ugh line, usually diving into areas of specific kinds of abuse and or violence. And I say specific because some people still get exceptions made for them. You have your Roman Polanski's, your Woody Allen's, and while I would really like if the people who continue to work and or defend people like that would just please stop. A lot of actors, and especially, continue to do that. A lot of actors who I like, whose work I enjoy, and I have to make the call, will I stop taking in their work? And by and large, the answer's usually been no. Because I may not like the fact that these people will work with Woody Allen or work with Roman Polanski, but there's sort of a next level to be taken with people actively saying, hey, we should bring these people back and be praising them in the U.S. and not condemning them. No, I don't think that's necessary. They're fine. They are perfectly well off, aging men with power and influence. They are fine. So you have your things like that, and there are other people who may have only done one or two things that I'm still going to judge. Even though they tried to walk it back, I'm always going to judge Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher for putting in a good word on Danny Masterson even after his conviction. And I like Mila Kunis in particular. I've actually liked a fair amount of her work. Is it a little harder for me to watch it? Yeah. Is that a line for everybody? No. But also, not everyone might remember. Not everyone might have realized in the first place. That's another thing to take into account. Just because somebody has crossed your personal line, that does not make it safe to assume that everyone is aware of that line having been crossed by that person. Some things are not as well known as they should be. But lest you take this as me pointing to the idea of, and therefore you should evangelize and be sure to educate everybody on the horrible thing this person did. No, I actually don't think that's healthy. That's when you get into sort of this anti-fandom space where you are building at the very least, an online footprint based around the idea of hating somebody. And I don't think that's healthy for discourse or for you as an individual. So again, that's another major thing to take into account, though. How many people are even aware of what the thing is that this person did? Because I'm not going to be diving into specifics of too many instances. I mean, I've mentioned a few, but I've been sticking to the better known ones for a reason. A lot of stuff people just don't know or have chosen to ignore. And if pressed, if I ever found myself in a position where I say, no, I don't want to watch that movie because X person is in it. And if someone were to ask me why, I'd tell them. But it's not my place to proffer that information up front. At least I don't think it is. I do understand the argument that if people are not made aware of the things that people with power and influence get away with, then they'll just keep getting away with it. I do understand that in principle. But again, we can look at somebody like R2 to see that this is somebody who was not known outside the fandom at all, but was still made a target. He doesn't have massive influence. He's not a celebrity, but it still happened. So while I wouldn't say that there's no validity in the idea that, well, you need to be sure people still remember so that people hopefully, ideally get held to account. I mean, I can get behind the theory of that. The reality of that is, do you help by shaming people for their enjoyment of a thing? Does that help with that goal? And I think that's ultimately the big thing for me. I don't think it does. When we're talking about toxic fandom interactions and judging people for the way that they take in or what they take in and who it supports, when we move out of single authorship issues with things like novelists and sole creators who will always get residuals off of any official thing related to whatever the item is, once we get off that specific area, things just get really messy. And there becomes a point at which how much does devoting your time and energy into telling people that they shouldn't like a thing because X person is in it, how is that actually furthering your goal? Do you have a goal? Is your goal to try and get fewer people to take in work that involves that person? That might have some validity, again, in terms of, maybe there being consequences when there haven't been before. But ultimately, most people won't frame it like that or feel it like that when talked to about these things. They'll feel like you're just trying to make them feel guilty. And if that's not your actual intent, then maybe your energies are best spent elsewhere. Find better works. Find stuff to promote that is in the same vein, in the same genre, would appeal to the same audience, that is not made by people with those kinds of issues. Promote that. Counter-programming is something I would really love to see more of in culture in general. There's this big appeal to tearing something down. We're like, how about we just build something better, separate from it? Do we have to tear the original down? Now, like, sometimes yes. I'm not going to say it's never yes, but more often than not, I think it's just like, shift people's focus. Oh, you like Harry Potter. Okay. Have you ever read Discworld? Have you ever read Books of Magic? You know, there's lots of other really neat stuff by very cool people that deal with these issues and notions and plots of school for wizards or witches. You ever hear The Worst Witch? That's a thing. You like children's literature? Have you tried Animorphs? It's very easy, I think, for us to get bogged down and almost kind of sunken in to the things that, boy, would it be nice if people would stop supporting that. But as much as I can understand and sympathize with that gut feeling of, oh God, why do you support that? Why do you continue to throw money at that? Why do you continue to praise publicly that when it benefits these people? Like, I get it. And I feel it sometimes. Again, I'd be lying if I didn't. I'm not trying to get on some moral high horse and saying that I don't judge people. But where you take it and what you do with those feelings, that could be better spent doing other things, doing something constructive rather than destructive. And again, depending on the nature of the person and the nature of the issue and the level of certainty, that's another thing that I don't want to get too far into the weeds on, but like, let's also be very honest about things that when we talk about these kinds of conversations, a lot of stuff that gets spread around very quickly doesn't have a lot of substantiation and is based off of stuff that people heard or saw or read, and they don't cite and they don't source. I think that's another thing, at least for me personally, it would make my life better. If you're going to start to go into people's comment sections or their replies or their DMs and cite to them all these reasons why they shouldn't be enjoying X actor, writer, video game director, whatever, maybe just come with some sources. Because even the times when people have brought this kind of stuff up to me and I looked into it and ultimately did find something, even in those cases, 9 times out of 10, I'm like, can you cite me a source for what you're saying? And I literally get nothing back. Most of them go real silent. Occasionally I'll get somebody who usually came in good faith and went, I'll try and find it, or, geez, I can't find it again. I was certain that I saw it. Some people will own up to that, but mostly they just go silent. How certain are you? Do you have a source? Because otherwise, how do you know you haven't just gotten taken in by a thing heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody? Misinformation is rampant, and part of the reason is just that nature of confirmation bias and or outrage. You hear something that clicks with the general idea of what you think of the world, whether it be you already didn't like this person, or it be a matter of, well, what this person did fits in with all this other kind of stuff that similar people have gotten away with, and you just run with it. Check it. I have talked about confirmation bias before in another video, but just breathe. I know, like, the phrase touch grass has become an oddly passive-aggressive thing to say these days, but at this point I would say breathe. And I mean that, like, stop, slow down, take a deep breath, look at what it is you're upset about. Look at what it is you're about to say. Look at how you're about to judge somebody. And figure out how much of this is fair. How certain I am that they know the thing I'm upset about. How fair is it to hold them to account even if they do know? Is this worth making a deal over? And maybe the answer is yes. But stop, pause, breathe, and at least do an honest assessment of whether or not it's worth it. I just had these ideas rattling around in my head. That's where a lot of this stuff comes from, ultimately. Sometimes I have it more formulated to get to a specific point. Sometimes I just got to get these thoughts out into the world, and maybe they'll help. Or maybe it's me hopeful thinking into the void. Who knows? But whatever your thoughts are on this, drop your comments down in the comment section. Yes, that was good talk English. I good talk speak. Patreon is what supports me and enables me to do this as my living. For some reason, I get paid to do this. Even if you can't support me that way, like, share, subscribe, they all help me out. But don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Now to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Barasalita, Oliver B., Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Jean Foray, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Bernabi Likes the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toka Blahuvian, Pal Barabajagal, and Mara G. Thank you so much for your support. You can get your name said, maybe even correctly, in the Patreon support tiers. Also, it helps me feed these little buggers.